Hey you guys, my name is Nicole Christensen and this is The Crime Happens Here. Today we're going to be talking about Brianna Lopez. So Brianna Lopez was a beautiful and gorgeous 5-month-old baby girl, and she died at the hands of her family members. It was a complete group effort and nobody was there to stop the sexual and physical abuse that sweet Brianna had to endure in her short life. So Brianna lived with her mother, Stephanie Lopez, her father, Andrew Lopez, her 18-month-old brother, Andy Jr., and then her uncle, Stephen Lopez. They lived in an extremely small and filthy mobile home. So it was the morning of July 19th, 2002, when Brianna's mother, Stephanie, called 911 because Brianna had just stopped breathing all of a sudden. Stephanie and Andrew took turns performing CPR on her to try to get her back, but it was really just too late at that point. She was transported by paramedics to the nearby hospital and she was just completely lifeless. Hospital personnel tried everything to resuscitate her, but it was unfortunately unsuccessful and she was officially pronounced dead. So after the shock and the adrenaline just kind of slowly wore off and settled down, and the hospital staff were finally just able to look and take in the baby girl, they just knew that something was completely off because she had likely suffered from catastrophic abuse that likely led to her death. So when I looked at the case and I saw the pictures of sweet Brianna, they were horrific, and I was going to share them, but I just felt that it was inappropriate and it was just too gruesome to share on this channel. But basically her head was just one big bruise, and it was a horrific sight. So the staff contacted authorities immediately because they just knew that this wasn't right and that this wasn't just an accident, especially since there were teeth marks that appeared to be adult teeth marks across her body. When police arrived, they asked Stephanie questions about Brianna's death. They also asked her questions about the injuries that were surrounding her body. Of course, Stephanie wasn't going to just say, "Oh yeah, we've been smashing her against the ceiling and sexually abusing her, and biting her." So she completely lied, obviously, and she said that the teeth marks were from her son, Andy Jr., and that Brianna had just fallen out of bed, which caused the bruising on her forehead and her just head trauma. So a pathologist would later testify at Stephanie's trial, and he would go on to say that Brianna died from cranial cerebral injuries, and she had bruising and scraping injuries throughout her head and forehead, and she also had 15 bite marks. So there was extensive injuries to baby Brianna's head and fatal injuries to her brain. She had bleeding within the membranes around the brain as well as around the nerves of her eyes. The autopsy revealed that Brianna's skull was fractured in 2 separate places on 2 different bones, and the fractures were at least 5 to 7 days old. So an examination of the membranes around her brain showed the presence of both old and new blood, indicating that Brianna had received separate brain injuries in the past, week or so. Baby Brianna's optical nerve were filled with both fresh and old blood, which meant that she had been violently shaken on at least 2 occasions. Baby Brianna suffered 2 rib fractures on the right side of her chest several weeks before her death, and she also had a bucket handle fracture on both her right and left thigh bones, as well as a fracture through the top of her left arm. These injuries were the result of her limbs being forced, twisted, or yanked. Baby Brianna's anus and vagina were also injured. You guys, this is a 5-month-old baby. It's just like, how can you hurt any child in this manner? Like any age, how can you hurt any person? But the fact that this was a 5-month-old baby, ugh. So baby Brianna's death was obviously characterized as, understandably, a homicide. All of the adults in Brianna's life were obviously interviewed, and asked about their role in the death. After the police informed Stephanie that they knew that none of her injuries could have been simply from falling out of the bed, she began to share all the abuse that she had witnessed. Not that she had done, but that she had witnessed at the hands of Andrew, Brianna's father, and Stephen, Brianna's uncle. This is sad, you guys. So she told the police that a couple of days before the death, Andrew was throwing Brianna up in the air and then getting out of the way so that she would come crashing down on the ground. This 5-month-old baby. But don't worry, you guys. Stephanie told them not to do that because she might get hurt. She didn't at any point actually stop it or even call authorities. Just simply told them not to do it. In the investigation, it also came out that not only would they move out of the way when throwing the baby up in the air, they would also throw her so hard up in the air that she would slam against the ceiling. Stephanie said that both Andrew and Stephen were seen doing this on multiple occasions. She, however, wouldn't admit to the bite marks and suggested that the toddler's son was the one who was biting Brianna, but the autopsy revealed that it was indeed adult-sized bite marks that would be impossible for a toddler to inflict. So once Andrew, Brianna's dad, was presented with the information about him throwing up Brianna in the air, he admitted that both him and his brother Stephen had thrown her up in the air to hit her against the ceiling and then would move out of the way for her to come crashing down on the ground. When police officers shared with Andrew that the teeth marks were likely from an adult, he admitted to biting baby Brianna the morning she died. The police officers asked if Brianna would cry when he would drop her on the ground, and he said yeah, she would cry, but then his response was to keep on throwing her into the ceiling. The officers then brought up the fact that Brianna had injuries to her anus. Andrew was very defensive, really angry, and he yelled at the officers and said, "You won't find any semen." He said he would wrap his finger in a baby wipe and shove his finger up her anus. When he would pull it out, there would be a little bit of blood on it. Andrew said that Stephanie would also be really rough with Brianna. On many occasions, she would be really frustrated with Brianna, so she would grab her by her ears, yank on her ears, and throw her into her baby seat. But of course, Stephanie didn't admit to this. She only admitted to Andrew and Stephen's abuse. So Stephen, Brianna's uncle, was also interviewed, and he had also admitted to throwing Brianna into the ceiling multiple times and then letting her crash down on the ground. He then shared that he had several beers and he started performing a sex act on Brianna, but then he realized it was wrong, so he stopped. It was determined later that both Andrew and Stephen had raped Brianna and that they would stuff her mouth with items like socks and stuff in order to muffle her cries. Stephanie Lopez was convicted by a jury of negligently permitting child abuse resulting in death or great bodily harm, and she was sentenced to 14.5 years in prison. Andrew and Stephen each received 18 years in prison. It's also notable to mention that Brianna's family members refused to claim her body. They refused to pay for a funeral for Brianna or even a casket for her, so she was just laying there unclaimed. Finally, the community members came forward and they decided to provide a beautiful casket as well as a funeral for the baby. The community members started placing flowers and balloons and teddy bears and other toys at her memorial site. The family of Brianna decided to build a cage. That's right, a cage around Brianna's gravesite so that nobody could leave flowers or toys or other stuffed animals. It now lives unmaintained, filled with trash and debris. 3 years after Brianna's death, laws in New Mexico changed. In 2005, Senate Bill 166, also called the Baby Brianna Bill, was signed into effect by then Governor Bill Richardson. Under the new bill, child abuse resulting in death was classified as a first-degree felony with a mandatory minimum sentence of 30 years in prison. People were very upset that Her mother only received 14 years, and her uncle and father received only 18 years. So they decided to pass this law so that they would have had to live at least 30 years in prison for what they did to Miss Little Brianna. All right, you guys, thank you for watching The Crime Happens Here. See you next time.